be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
Isn't it wonderful to see the photos of loved ones up there and right in the middle of our reflections? I have often shared a true story with you, which is, I find particularly helpful today. It's a true story about a little boy who had a lot of questions to ask me. And as his father brought him forward during the Eucharist, he tried to jump in and ask me these questions while I was handing out the bread. And his father said, just take the bread for now. We'll ask him later. And sure enough, at the end of the service, there he came, running up the aisle, filled with enthusiasm. Don't you just love that image? The image of a young child who's got to have an answer to something, who's excited, who's urgent, wants to know something. It was just delightful, although I didn't know what the question was that would be coming. But I said, well, what is your question that you have for me? And he pointed to the baldacchino, the ring around the altar, and he said, is that the actual size of a halo? And I had to think on my feet. But here's what I ended up telling him, because in some way it inspired me to solidify my theology about community. I said, that halo is that big because it's the halo of St. John's, the entire community. In fact, none of us have halos by ourselves. It is only a gathered community that creates a halo. And he, I think, liked that. He felt he was part of the halo and that he didn't have to compare himself with anybody. But this community, in and of itself, comes together to create the halo. And I like to point out that this is All Saints' Day. Have you ever wondered why it's not called Some Saints' Day? But we tend to think of it that way. Oh, who are the saints? We don't include ourselves in sainthood. We don't see ourselves that way. In fact, and this was kind of fun because I at staff, the staff devotional this week, I said, I think that the word saint is never mentioned in the Bible. And Steve got right on it. We went right to the internet. She said, you are absolutely right. The word saint does not appear in our Bible. The word saints does. Always plural. Always. Never singular. No one is separated out as higher than anybody else. We are either saints together or not saintly at all. It's a wonderful image. Only tradition screwed it up, where we began to focus on certain people, certain saints' days, and it's not at all biblical. Our biblical foundation about Saints' Day is that we are all saints when we gather as a community of people and connect one to another. Now, there's another story about the baldacchino that I like to share. Traditionally, our youth group has had a special prayer they call the Zap. And it's a funny prayer. Basically, it's composed of them gathering in a circle, offering what we call popcorn prayers, which are just little thanksgivings or prayers for people or things that come to mind, and includes all kinds of things. But we close it by counting to 3, one of the leaders, and we hold hands and we rise up and lift up our hands and we, with the loudest voice possible, say, zap. So one day I thought, I got the inspiration to do it around the altar, and we were doing it, closing our time together with a zap, and as the zap was said, and you have to remain completely silent after it, the idea is to be loud and then quiet, the baldacchino was resonating. And you could hear it just, and so it became a symbol of how our voice can change things. How we can put our voice out into the world and the halo resonates when that happens. But just as we're committed to justice and action in the world and putting our voice out there for equality and for love and compassion, I like to think that we also polish the halo with our rough edges. And we have rough edges. And sometimes we reject them. We have, the gospel today fits perfectly with All Saints. It's not about, look at the saints, they're great. Yes, let's rejoice. It's blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who are despised and rejected. Blessed are those who mourn, who feel grief, who feel loss. That is the polish. And we forget to bring that to church. It has always amazed me how sometimes people are suffering in their own isolation. We are so sometimes ashamed of our weakness, of our struggles, of our doubts, of our hunger, of our questions, that we fail to bring them into the community. But that's the polish of that halo. Blessed are those who need each other. Blessed are you if you really need the person sitting next to you to hear what's going on. Blessed are you when you reach out and you see in someone's eyes some agony. And you just say, how are you doing? To which they'll say, I'm fine. To which you will say, really? That's not what I'm feeling. How are you? That is how community is cemented together, with compassion. And you would think we would get that if only the main symbol of our faith tradition would be something that had to do with suffering. Oh, wait. The cross. We process it down, we process it out. Do you feel invited to put yourself in that procession? To say, I'm working here on something. There's something I want to grow with. There's something I need in my life. There's anxieties and fears. There's relationships that are difficult for me right now. To bring that towards the altar, just, as we walk the cross there. And to welcome that from others as well in the community. When we share and hear each other's stories, compassion is stirred, and our joyous purpose is enlivened. We're here for each other. I am here for you. You are here for me. We are here for one another. Now, one final point, which is hugely important. Yes, many of us have experienced exclusion from religious communities in one form or another. Anybody not experience exclusion? It might be our politics, our sexuality, our skin color, or the questions we asked, our viewpoints. I remember, I was thinking about that this week. I remember one time being booed at the convention. And I don't think it was everybody who was booing me, but there were a good subset of the convention, because we were running these beautiful, beautiful bookend ads that were created for prime time. I don't know if any of you remember those ads. I wish we could get a copy of them. They were brilliant. And they were meant to get people into churches, right? One of my favorite was a close-up of the face of a Hispanic woman. And it said, "We know the place of a woman." And it panned out, and she's a priest behind the altar. These were like little bookend ads like that. Some of them were funny. They were, you hear honking horns and said, "You've said his name often enough in traffic. Come to church and say his name where it counts." It made me really excited about people coming to the church. And so I just stood up and I said, if we're inviting them to dinner, can we feed them? Can we welcome everybody at the table unconditionally? Do we have to put all baptized people, or the one that really gets me, all those who are seeking God may come forward? Like, how do you measure that? And thus the boos. Our canon laws say you have to be baptized, or you have to be a communicant in good standing, or whatever. And so that was a moment of exclusion for me. And ironically, I was trying to promote non-exclusion when that happened. But it was okay. Whatever our pain is, and we know it's there, that's what makes us hesitant to talk about faith and about God, because we know there's massive pain around that out there in the community. But whatever it is, we can get beyond that. We can, because the exclusion of others is about them. And we know that exclusion is baseless and probably more about fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing control. But what we must realize is that the biggest force of exclusion we encounter is our own self-exclusion. We oppress ourselves. We think we're not worthy. We think we're not gifted. We think we're not good enough. We think that what we're going through is unacceptable, or embarrassing, or a sign of weakness, and we self-exclude. We have to be cautious of that. Now you add the pandemic on top of all that, where we've practiced not being together. We've practiced not seeing each other's eyes, watching body language, interacting in those unique ways that only happen in person. And we're generally unaware of how deep our suffering has been in this pandemic. You have suffered. You know, of course we do the same old stiff upper lip, you know. People have it worse than I do. And that does nothing for building the community. Nothing. All it shows is that we really don't want to go there because it's hard. It's hard when you've had something painful happen to you. And we hide it, we bury it. And it doesn't help us, and it certainly doesn't help the community that is here to support you in that. Every person in this room is suffering. Think about that. There is nobody in this room that is not in some way, shape, or form suffering. And when you look at that, doesn't that stir compassion? I want to know what's going on. I want to know how you're doing. And that's the cement of this halo. That's the extension of that halo over us. None of us are perfect. All of us are making mistakes. And all of us are hurt in some way. Suffering presents itself as an opportunity for healing, just as it did for resurrection. If we're going to resurrect the church, it's going to start at the cross. The cross where we feel some pain and loss. You know, and it's been a tough several years. Later during the Eucharist, we will read the names of our members who died during the pandemic. And then we will invite you to add your names after you receive the bread to come here. This will be moved over there. And at the microphone, you can add names of people in your family or friends that you've lost so that we bring all of that forth. That we are not alone. We are all in this together. We are so independent, it's a shame. It's just because we're afraid. Have you ever felt like it's hard to feel compassion for someone that has it all together? You know those Christmas letters you get? Like, well, good for them. It sounds like a Hallmark card. It's wonderful. We put that face forward. And it's okay because, and I realize I do that too. I do that too. But as I reflect about it, it's because I get embarrassed if I'm weak, or I'm ashamed of not being strong enough or good enough. And so I fail to have compassion for myself. And as I've been preaching over the weeks, if you don't have compassion for yourself, good luck having compassion for somebody else. You can sympathize with them. Oh, that's just too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. But that's not what they need. They need empathy. You need to empathize with them. And the only way you can empathize is empathize with yourself. You've been through a lot. And the stories in this room are just, I'm sure, incredible with everything that you've been through. Such voices that tell us and keep us from sharing our suffering are not from God. We believe in a God that's done everything possible to bring suffering as an issue for us to the front. You are suffering. I am here. I'm suffering with you. I'm going to bring you to a place where there are no longer any more tears. But I need to be with you in that place. God is here for us as well. We can only celebrate All Saints' Day properly by understanding that we are all saints. When we are together, we are all saints. And we need each other now more than ever. And we need to start by welcoming ourselves. Welcoming our story. Listening to ourselves. Understanding that that compassion that stirs within us and for what we've been through then becomes the extension into the world of the compassion the world so desperately needs. Today, as we remember the saints who have gone before, I like the fact that we use the Apostles' Creed because that specifically says we believe in the communion of saints. The communion of saints. You can pray to your relatives. You can talk to them. There's a communion of sainthood that has been traditionally accepted by the church, acknowledging the strength that's here in the root system of our church. Last week, I think I made the reference to the labyrinth as the path, the varying path that we're on, and that labyrinth also has a root system in its design. It's a tree, and just as Zacchaeus climbed a tree, we can walk the labyrinth, but we also can remember the roots, our roots, the people, the saints who have, as imperfect as they were as well, done something to keep St. John's moving forward. We wouldn't be sitting here if they hadn't. We wouldn't be who we are without all of that faith and courage that had gone before us. So I ask you to embrace your own sainthood today. Embrace your place under the halo. It's ours. Without you under it, it's not as beautiful. It's not as powerful. Let's polish it with our stories. I mean, that's something that never happened on Zoom. Well, tell me about your story. Or how did your week go? So I'm going to get another Zoom meeting. It's hard. It was two-dimensional, let's face it. It wasn't three-dimensional. It wasn't four-dimensional. And we lost a lot in all of that. But we get to come back to church. So, I like to think about, okay, it's time to go back to church. What church would I choose? What church would I go back to? I hope St. John's is a place that welcomes you, not just in word, but in story. Everything about you. It's such a beautiful thing. Let's let our compassion surface in new ways and vibrate that ring. And let us imagine the many joyous ways we can enlarge the halo as others continue to be welcomed under this symbol of God's presence, healing, and love. This symbol, a ring, that reminds us that we are not alone and we are always welcome.